My name is Claire. I am 35 years old, and I never thought my life would unravel inside the very house where I grew up. You know, people say that family is supposed to be your safety net, the place that catches you when everything else falls apart. But for me, the safety net turned into a trap. 2 years ago, I went through a brutal divorce. After 12 years of marriage, I was left with shared custody, minimal alimony, and the crushing weight of raising my 10-year-old twins, Lucas and Ava. I was working 12-hour shifts as a pediatric nurse, and exhaustion had become my constant companion. When my parents opened their doors to us, I thought it was salvation. I thought I had found solid ground. I could not have been more wrong. At first, it felt like a blessing. They offered me the guest room and turned the old office into a bedroom for the twins. I pitched in for groceries, cooked meals, kept the house tidy. I told myself this was temporary, just until I saved enough for a place of our own. I had a chart taped inside the bathroom cabinet, marking every dollar I put aside, promising the kids that by Christmas we would have our own home. But even as I worked toward that goal, there was a shadow over everything, a shadow I had known since childhood. Growing up, I was the responsible one. The one who followed the rules, earned good grades, kept the peace. My younger brother Brian was the golden child. He could do no wrong. He dropped out of college, yet my parents funded his tech startup until it finally turned a profit. They bragged about his 6-figure salary while my steady career in nursing was brushed aside like it did not matter. I had lived under this imbalance for so long that I thought I was numb to it. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened once Brian had a child of his own. When Brian and his wife had their baby boy Ethan, everything shifted. My parents had adored my twins for 10 years, or at least I thought they had. But the moment Ethan arrived, Lucas and Ava seemed to vanish from their vision. It was not subtle either. Overnight, the house was transformed. The formal dining room was turned into a nursery for Ethan, even though Brian and his wife lived across town in a 4-bedroom home. They filled it with brand new cribs and high-end strollers, items that would only be used during visits. My mother, who once helped with school pickups for my kids, suddenly had no time for them. "Your brother needs support right now," she would say. The irony burned in my chest. I had been a single parent for 2 years, and no one had ever said those words for me. The first time I noticed my children shrink into themselves was at a family dinner. My mother had spent hours preparing Brian's favorite foods. Lucas asked politely if there was something else he could eat. She snapped, calling him ungrateful. Minutes later, Ethan threw his entire plate on the floor and everyone laughed. "He's just exploring Melissa," my sister-in-law said casually. That laughter still echoes in my head. My son's dignity was dismissed while Ethan's tantrum became entertainment. That was the beginning of a descent I did not see coming. It felt like betrayal, but deeper, because it was not directed at me. It was directed at my children. They were old enough to notice the favoritism, old enough to feel the sting of being second class in a house that was supposed to be their home. And that realization hardened something inside me. Family I once believed was unshakable. But as I sat at that dinner table, watching my son's smile crumble and my daughter sit in silence, I realized something. Blood alone does not guarantee loyalty. Love has to be proven in actions, not just words. This is where the story truly begins. When I was a little girl, I thought I could win my parents' love by being perfect. I was the one who kept curfews, who studied late into the night, who never dared to break the rules. My brother Brian, on the other hand, broke every one of them. He cut classes, crashed cars, dropped out of school. Yet somehow, every time my parents excused it. "He's just finding his way," they would say. For me, there were no excuses, only expectations. I had to be the example, the one who held everything together. That old imbalance was woven into my bones, so much so that when I moved back into my parents' house after the divorce, I ignored the alarm bells in my head. I told myself it would be different now. Surely, as an adult with 2 children of my own, I would finally be treated as an equal. But I was wrong. The truth is, Brian was always their golden child. He could stumble into a mess and somehow come out praised for his potential. When he started his tech company with money borrowed, no gifted from my parents, they called it a bold move. When I worked nights in nursing school juggling clinicals and part-time shifts to pay tuition, they barely noticed. Brian bought a new car at 22. My father bragged to anyone who would listen. I bought my first used car with my own savings, and my mother said, "Be careful, you don't want debt to drag you down." That pattern of favoritism was so ingrained that it felt normal. For years I accepted it. But after Ethan was born, it became impossible to ignore. Every gesture, every comment, every look carried the same message: Brian and his family mattered more. My children, my sweet twins, who had already endured a divorce and the upheaval of moving into their grandparents' home, were treated as afterthoughts, and that cut deeper than anything I had felt growing up. Lucas noticed first. He is my dreamer, my artist, the one who spends hours drawing intricate sketches or building cardboard castles. One afternoon, he showed my mother a painting he had made for school, a swirling mix of colors with our family standing together in the center. She barely glanced at it before turning back to Brian's baby pictures, comparing Ethan's smile to Brian's as a toddler. Lucas folded the paper quietly and never mentioned it again. That night, I found it in the trash. Ava, my firebrand, handled it differently. She has a bold streak, unafraid to speak up when something feels wrong. At dinner one night, after Ethan was praised for babbling, she said, "I learned a new soccer drill today." My father chuckled and replied, "That's nice, but Ethan might walk soon." Imagine that Ava clenched her jaw, and later in her room, she whispered to me, "Why don't they care what I do?" I had no answer. The favoritism was not just about words, it was about space. My parents converted the dining room into a nursery for Ethan, even though Brian and Melissa had a 4-bedroom house across town. They filled it with a crib, a rocking chair, stacks of toys. Meanwhile, Lucas and Ava shared a small room lined with boxes, their artwork crammed into corners, their toys pushed aside. My mother would scold them for leaving Legos out, but never once complained when Ethan's toys sprawled across the living room floor. And yet in those months I tried to convince myself that things would settle. I reminded the twins, "It's just the novelty of a new baby. You had all their attention for 10 years. It will balance out." I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But deep down I knew better. Because I had lived this story before. I had been the invisible child overshadowed by the one my parents adored no matter what. Now it was happening again, not just to me, but to my children. History was repeating itself, and I could not unsee it. One evening after a particularly long shift, I came home to find Ava sitting on the porch, her jump rope limp at her feet. Her eyes were red. Grandma said I was too loud, she told me, but Ethan wasn't even sleeping. Aunt Melissa just didn't like hearing me count. Her voice cracked. "Why is it always us, Mom?" That question lodged itself in my chest. Why is it always us? The cruel answer was simple: because in this house, we were never the priority. We were the obligation, the ones who had to adapt, to shrink, to sacrifice. Brian's family was the pride, the joy, the reason my parents glowed. And I realized something in that moment. I could no longer excuse it as novelty. I could no longer tell myself my children would be fine. The cycle I had endured was now theirs, unless I broke it. But back then, I did not yet know how. I only knew that the house where I thought I would find refuge was becoming a cage. And the golden child's shadow was stretching, suffocating us all. After my marriage ended, I thought the hardest part was over. 12 years with Daniel had dissolved into custody papers and silence. And I was left holding the pieces. The emotional wreckage was heavy, but the financial collapse was crushing. Daniel was a software engineer. His income had carried our mortgage, our vacations, our sense of security. When the divorce was finalized, I received minimal alimony and shared custody. Suddenly, I had to work full-time as a nurse, raise 2 children, and figure out how to build a life on my own. I told myself I was strong enough. I had to be. For Lucas and Ava, there was no other option. When my parents offered their home, it felt like a lifeline. "Just until you get back on your feet," my father said, patting my shoulder as if he understood. I chose to believe him. I convinced myself that we would stay a year, save money, and move out. I taped a savings chart to the bathroom wall, where the twins could see. Every week when I deposited even a small amount into my account, I colored in another square. By Christmas, we'll have our own place, I promised them. Their eyes lit up each time I said it. That chart became our beacon of hope. The arrangement started well enough. I contributed to groceries, cooked most of the meals, and made sure the twins respected my parents' space. My mother seemed pleased to have order in her house again. My father enjoyed having the yard trimmed when I forced myself to do chores after 12-hour shifts. Lucas and Ava adapted quickly, filling the converted office with drawings, books, and Lego creations. For a while, I thought maybe, just maybe, this would work. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. I was painfully aware of how expensive housing had become in our area. Even a modest 2-bedroom apartment required a security deposit and first month's rent that felt like climbing Everest on my nurse's salary. Every extra shift I picked up at the hospital was another step closer. But also another day I returned home bone-tired, unable to do more than collapse next to my kids. My body ached, my mind buzzed, but I told myself it was worth it. The twins were resilient. Lucas, with his quiet sensitivity, expressed himself through drawings pinned to the walls. Ava, with her fiery confidence, joined every game at school, always standing up when she saw unfairness. They made me proud every single day. Despite the upheaval, they kept their grades steady, even smiled when I came home late from a shift. But I could see the strain in their eyes. They knew this was temporary. They wanted a place of their own as much as I did. Then came the shift I had not expected. Brian and Melissa announced they were expecting. My parents reacted as though royalty was arriving. They bought bassinet strollers, high chairs. They converted the dining room into a nursery, never mind that Brian's house across town had more than enough space. "They'll need help," my mother said, dismissing me when I raised an eyebrow. "He's new to parenting." The irony almost made me laugh. New to parenting, I had been doing this alone for 2 years. 2 years of balancing night shifts, homework, asthma medication, soccer practice, and tears in the middle of the night. No one had once called me new to parenting. No one had fussed over me, filled a nursery, or bought expensive gadgets to make my life easier. My parents' priorities had always been tilted, but now the weight had shifted entirely away from me and my children. Still, I tried to be understanding. "It's their first baby," I told Lucas and Ava. "They're just excited." I asked them to be patient. We had held on to hope for so long. I did not want bitterness to poison what little peace we had. But the cracks grew. Christmas came, and the gifts under the tree told the whole story. Ethan, barely a few months old, had piles of boxes, expensive toys, designer clothes, while Lucas and Ava opened practical sweaters and a shared board game. The disappointment on their faces was sharp, but they smiled politely. That night, after the wrapping paper was cleared, I sat with them in our small room. "We'll make our own traditions," I whispered. "Movie nights, park days, pancake Sundays, just us." They leaned against me, nodding. Their resilience broke my heart. I doubled down on my plan. Extra shifts, no unnecessary expenses, every dollar tucked away. By spring, I calculated that by November, we could afford our own apartment. I circled the date on the chart, November 1st. Just a few more months, I promised the twins. By Christmas, we'll be in our own home. They believed me, and I clung to that belief like oxygen. But belief cannot shield you from reality. As Brian's family grew more present in the house, the walls began to close in. My parents' smiles grew wider for him, their patience thinner for me. Every decision I made as a mother was scrutinized. Bedtimes, meals, screen time, it all became points of critique. Meanwhile, Brian and Melissa were treated like royalty, no matter how irresponsible or inconsiderate they were. That was when I started to feel it, the subtle shift from being a daughter to being an unwelcome guest. And deep down I knew. The safety net I had once clung to was starting to strangle us. The small things always cut the deepest. At first it was easy to dismiss them as oversights, as harmless quirks of grandparents favoring the novelty of a new baby. But as weeks passed, those little moments began to form a pattern, a web of slights that tightened around my children until they could no longer ignore it. It started with Christmas. Ethan's gifts were stacked so high they nearly touched the tree, while Lucas and Ava each received 2 packages sweaters and a shared puzzle. My twins smiled politely, thanked their grandparents, and then watched in silence as everyone fussed over Ethan's new baby gear. That night when the house was quiet, Ava whispered to me, "Do they love him more than us?" The question sliced me open. I told her no, but my voice shook, betraying the truth I didn't want her to hear. Then came the comparisons. My parents cooed over how much Ethan looked like Brian had as a baby. They repeated it like a mantra, as if resemblance itself was a badge of superiority. "He's the spitting image of Brian," my mother would say proudly. Meanwhile, when they looked at my children, they'd remark, "Lucas has his father's nose. Ava has his stubbornness." It was never about me, never about them as individuals. Always framed as though they were tethered to someone else never worthy in their own right. Lucas, sensitive as he was, took the brunt of it. One afternoon he came home beaming, carrying a drawing that had been chosen to represent his class in a school exhibition. He presented it to my mother, his eyes glowing with pride. She barely glanced at it before waving him off. "Not now, Lucas. I'm helping Melissa pick curtains." His face fell and he folded the paper into his pocket. Later, I found it crumpled in the trash can. I smoothed it out, tears stinging my eyes, and taped it to our wall. "Your art matters," I told him. But the damage was already done. Ava tried to fight. She was bold, unafraid to speak up when she sensed unfairness. Once while practicing her clarinet, Melissa stormed in and scolded her. "Ethan's trying to nap. Can't you do that later?" Ava put her instrument away, but her fists clenched. She told me later I had practice scheduled with my teacher. Now I'll be unprepared. Why does he matter more than me? I didn't know how to answer. I could only hug her and promise her she mattered, even if the walls of this house told her otherwise. Even the refrigerator became a battleground. The twins' artwork, which once decorated the door, disappeared overnight. In its place hung Ethan's daycare schedule and rows of photos of him smiling, drooling, sitting in his high chair. When I asked, Melissa shrugged. "We need important things where we can see them." I wanted to scream. My children's creations were not disposable. They were pieces of their hearts. The twins began retreating. They no longer lingered in the living room. They stopped playing in the backyard after being told their laughter was too loud. Instead, they confined themselves to their small shared bedroom, the one space in the house where they could breathe without criticism. I started taking them to the library after school, just to give them a place where they could spread out, where no one shushed them or dismissed their efforts. And all the while my parents criticized me. They stay up too late. They eat too much sugar. They spend too much time on screens. Every decision I made as a mother was dissected, while Brian and Melissa's choices were unquestioned. They could arrive late to family dinners, cancel plans, and everyone forgave them instantly. My children had to be perfect to avoid reproach, yet Ethan could throw food on the floor and be praised as exploring his world. It was a slow erosion, but I could see the toll it took on Lucas and Ava. Their shoulders slumped lower each day, their smiles faded. Even their laughter, once bright and unrestrained, became rare. My heart broke each time I saw them shrink, each time they chose silence, oversharing their joy, because silence was safer. One evening, Lucas came to me with wide eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "do Grandma and Grandpa even like us anymore?" His voice trembled. I pulled him close, holding him against my chest, fighting back tears. "Of course they do," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. He pressed further. "Then why does it feel like we don't matter?" That was the moment something inside me hardened. I had spent my whole life chasing my parents' approval, accepting scraps of affection, convincing myself it was enough. But watching my children suffer the same fate, it was unbearable. I could not let their sense of worth be eroded by the same favoritism that had defined my childhood. From then on, I stopped excusing it as new baby excitement. I stopped telling myself it would balance out. I began to see clearly this was not about novelty. This was about hierarchy. Brian and his family were exalted. We were tolerated. And I knew tolerance was not enough for my children. This was the turning point, the quiet realization before the storm, that staying here meant teaching Lucas and Ava to accept less than they deserved. And I refused to let that lesson take root. The breaking point didn't arrive with an explosion. It slipped into our lives quietly, wearing the mask of family duty. One September evening, Brian called for a family meeting. I was exhausted from a 12-hour hospital shift, but I sat at the kitchen table anyway, Lucas and Ava upstairs doing their homework. Brian and Melissa arrived with baby Ethan in tow, dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than my entire grocery budget for the week. My parents beamed as if royalty had just walked in. Brian's announcement was delivered with the same smug confidence he'd carried since childhood. "We're finally moving forward with the renovation on our house," he said, eyes fixed on our parents. Melissa chimed in, bouncing Ethan on her lap. "It'll take 6 to 8 weeks. We'll need somewhere to stay during the construction." Before I could process what she was implying, my father was already nodding. "Of course you'll stay here. There's plenty of room." My chest tightened. Plenty of room. There were already 5 of us crammed into the house, me, the twins, and my parents. Space was tight routines, already strained. I cleared my throat and tried to object. "Actually, we're already a bit crowded." My mother cut me off with a sharp look. "Family helps family, Claire. It's only temporary." And just like that, the decision was made. My voice, my children's comfort, none of it mattered. Brian and Melissa moved in the following weekend, sweeping through the house as though they owned it. The changes were immediate, suffocating. My father helped Brian set up a portable crib in their room, something he had never once offered to do when Lucas and Ava moved in. My mother cleared an entire closet for Melissa's clothes, though my belongings had lived in suitcases for months before I scraped enough to buy a small dresser. The double standard was blinding. Suddenly my children were told to keep their voices down because Ethan is napping. Their toys, already limited to their bedroom and a small corner of the living room, were now deemed clutter and packed into boxes. The television was perpetually tuned to Melissa's shows, as though the house revolved around her preferences. When I came home one evening, I found Ava on the back porch, shoulders slumped. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked. She sniffled. "Grandma said I was too loud with my jump rope." But Ethan wasn't even sleeping. He was in the living room. I clenched my fists, furious at the injustice, but all I could do was pull her close. The very next week, Lucas brought home exciting news: his artwork had been chosen for a district exhibition. He raced to show my mother. She waved him away. "Not now, Lucas. I'm helping Melissa pick curtains." His face crumpled, and something inside me snapped. How could she dismiss her own grandson's achievement for something as trivial as curtains? That night, after the twins were asleep, I tried to reason with my parents. I explained that Lucas and Ava felt invisible, that the constant criticism was hurting them. My father frowned and said, "They're being oversensitive. Kids need to learn babies require more attention." I pointed out that Ethan was in daycare most of the day, that the twins weren't asking for attention then. My mother sighed dramatically. "You've always been jealous of your brother, Claire. I thought you'd have grown out of it." Jealous. That single word crushed me. Was that really what they thought? That I was envious, not protective, that I was bitter, not concerned? Their blindness was staggering. As weeks passed, Brian and Melissa acted like the house was theirs. Melissa rearranged the kitchen, complained about the snacks I bought for my kids, and left her laundry piled in the machine. Brian hosted watch parties without asking his friends, sprawled in the living room, while Lucas and Ava retreated upstairs. Then came Sunday dinner. My mother prepared all of Brian's favorite dishes, none of which my children enjoyed. Lucas, ever polite, asked if there was something else he could eat. She snapped, "You're being ungrateful. When I was your age, we ate what was put in front of us." Later, when Ethan threw his food onto the floor, everyone laughed. "He's exploring," Melissa explained, making no effort to clean up. Lucas leaned toward me and whispered, "How come Ethan can throw food, but I can't even ask for a sandwich?" I had no answer. That same week, Lucas and Ava's artwork was removed from the refrigerator, replaced with Ethan's daycare schedule and smiling photos. My children's space was erased. They stopped spending time in the common areas altogether, retreating to their room or the library with me after school. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage where only Brian's family mattered and the rest of us were shadows. I worked extra shifts, pushing myself to exhaustion, partly to save money faster, partly to avoid the toxic air at home. My parents complained I was shirking responsibilities, while Brian and Melissa seemed relieved I was gone. They had the stage to themselves. And every day my children's eyes dimmed a little more. That was when I realized this wasn't temporary. This wasn't family helping family. This was displacement, and something had to change. Dinner was supposed to be a time of comfort, a chance to sit down together and remember we were a family. But in that house, dinner became another battlefield. One more reminder that my children and I were outsiders. It happened one Sunday in early October. My mother had spent the entire afternoon cooking, but every dish she prepared was for Brian. There was roast beef seasoned just the way he liked, mashed potatoes dripping with butter, even his favorite pie cooling on the counter. Lucas and Ava sat at the table. Politely, their plates filled, but I could see immediately that none of it appealed to them. Lucas, always careful with his words, asked quietly, "Grandma, is there anything else I could eat?" His voice was respectful, hopeful. My mother's face hardened. "You're being ungrateful," she snapped. "When I was a child, we ate what was put in front of us. You should do the same." Lucas's shoulders slumped, and he pushed his fork around silently. Minutes later, Ethan perched in his high chair beside Melissa, grabbed his plate with chubby hands and hurled it onto the floor. Food splattered across the tiles. For a moment, silence hung in the air, and then everyone laughed. "He's just exploring," Melissa said indulgently, wiping Ethan's chin. No one scolded him, no one frowned. They found it charming. Lucas looked at me, confusion clouding his eyes. He leaned closer, whispering, "How come Ethan can throw food, but I can't even ask for a sandwich?" My throat tightened. I wanted to scream at the hypocrisy, to demand answers, but all I could do was place my hand over his and squeeze. "I know, sweetheart," I whispered, but I had no good answer. That night, as I cleaned the kitchen alone, I felt something crack inside me. My children weren't just being ignored anymore, they were being humiliated. And worse, they knew it. The unfairness continued in 1,000 tiny ways. One afternoon, I discovered that Lucas's artwork and Ava's soccer ribbons had been removed from the refrigerator door. In their place, Melissa had pinned Ethan's daycare schedule and half a dozen photographs of him. When I asked about it, Melissa shrugged. We needed space for important things. I didn't think anyone would mind. Anyone. That word stung. My children weren't anyone. They were someone. They were everything. From that point on, Lucas and Ava stopped venturing into the common areas of the house. They no longer curled up on the couch for cartoons or played board games on the floor. Instead, they retreated to their cramped shared bedroom, the only space left untouched by Brian and Melissa's growing dominion. I started taking them to the public library after school, whenever I wasn't working. It wasn't glamorous, but at least there they could spread out, laugh, and be themselves without fear of being scolded. Even in those safe spaces, though, the weight of home followed us. Lucas grew quieter. His teachers emailed me about his sudden withdrawal in class. Ava, usually bold, became short-tempered, snapping at friends. They were absorbing the toxic message the house sent daily. "You don't matter as much." I tried again to confront my parents, to make them see. I explained that the twins felt unwanted, that these double standards were hurting them. My father brushed me off. "They're oversensitive," he said. "Ethan is a baby, he needs more attention." My mother sighed as if I were being ridiculous. "Claire, you've always been jealous of your brother. Don't take it out on the children." Jealous, that word again. It burned hotter this time. I wasn't jealous. I was angry. Angry that my children's worth was being weighed against Ethan's, and they were found lacking. Angry that my parents refused to see the damage they were causing. Angry that the cycle I had endured was repeating itself through the next generation. I knew then that dinner wasn't just a meal anymore. It was a mirror showing me exactly where we stood. Ethan's mess was celebrated. My son's polite request was condemned. Ethan's presence filled the house. My children's presence was an inconvenience. After that night, I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped waiting for my parents to notice. Instead, I began saving even harder, doubling my shifts at the hospital. Every aching step on those long nights was fueled by one thought: get them out. But even with my determination, I couldn't predict how quickly things would escalate. Dinner was just the spark. The real fire was yet to come. And when it came, it would burn everything I thought I knew about family. The words that finally broke my denial didn't come from my parents. They didn't even come from Brian or Melissa. They came from people outside the family, people who could see clearly what I had been too deep inside to admit. It was a Thursday night at the hospital. I was charting after a grueling shift, hands aching, eyes heavy. My coworker Nancy glanced at me and asked softly, "Everything okay at home?" That simple question opened a floodgate. Before I knew it, I was spilling everything: how Lucas's art had been dismissed, how Ava was silenced, how the refrigerator that once held their drawings now displayed Ethan's daycare schedule. I told her about dinners where my children were criticized, while Ethan's tantrums were praised. My voice shook as I admitted, "It feels like my kids don't belong there anymore." Nancy listened quietly, her brow furrowed. When I finished, she said something that cut straight through the haze. "It sounds like your parents have created a household where Brian's family are honored guests, and you and your kids are just inconvenient roommates." Her words struck me like a slap. In one sentence, she had stripped away all the excuses I had clung to. I wanted to believe it was just new baby excitement. I wanted to believe things would balance out. But she was right. We weren't guests. We weren't family. We were afterthoughts. The next day, my Aunt Susan called, inviting us to Sunday dinner. She had always been kind to the twins, always slipped them extra cookies, or asked about their school projects. At dinner, she watched quietly as my parents bragged endlessly about Ethan, how advanced he was, how athletic, how much he resembled Brian. My mother even added, "Too bad Lucas didn't inherit those traits from Daniel's side of the family." I saw my son's face fall, his lips pressed tightly together to keep from crying. Later that evening, Aunt Susan pulled me aside. Her eyes were steady, her voice calm. "How long has it been like this?" she asked. I hesitated, then admitted, "It's always been this way, but it's worse since Brian's family moved in." She shook her head slowly. "Claire, this is not healthy for your children. They deserve better than this." There it was again, the truth spoken from someone who had nothing to gain by saying it. First Nancy, now Susan. Two people outside the toxic bubble confirming what I had been afraid to name. That night, lying awake in bed, I replayed their words over and over. Inconvenient roommates. They deserve better. My children's faces floated in my mind. Lucas quietly folding his drawings into the trash. Ava putting away her clarinet with tears in her eyes. The pattern was undeniable. The favoritism I had endured as a child was now crushing them. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, a single thought growing louder in my mind. I had to get them out. Not someday. Not after I saved a little more. Soon. The following week, I called a realtor friend on my lunch break. My voice shook as I told her I need to find a place, something small, something safe. "I can't let this continue." She promised to help. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. At home, though, nothing changed. If anything, things grew worse. Melissa rearranged the kitchen as if it were hers, moving the twins' snacks to the back of the pantry. Brian invited friends over for loud watch parties, leaving crumbs and bottles everywhere, while my children were told to stay out of the way. My parents turned a blind eye, smiling indulgently at everything Brian did, frowning at everything I did. But now I carried Nancy's words with me like a compass. Each slight, each dismissal, each insult no longer felt like confusion. They were proof that the environment was toxic, proof that staying was harming my children. One night after another exhausting shift, I found Ava waiting awake in her bed. "Mom," she whispered, "why do they treat us different? Is it because of Uncle Brian?" Her voice trembled, and I realized she was old enough to understand what was happening. I smoothed her hair and kissed her forehead. "It's not you, sweetheart. It's them. And I promise you one day soon we'll have our own place. Somewhere you'll never have to wonder if you matter." She nodded, eyes heavy with sleep, but a faint smile touched her lips. She believed me. In that moment, I knew I couldn't let them down. The house we lived in was no longer a home. It was a battlefield where their self-worth was being chipped away. And I was ready to fight back, not with arguments, not with pleas to parents who would never change, but with action. Because sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is walk away. Once the truth had been spoken out loud, I couldn't go back to pretending. The denial I had carried for months, telling myself that things would balance out, that Lucas and Ava just had to be patient, was gone. Every morning, I woke up, went to work, and carried the same thought with me. We need to get out. I started taking small, deliberate steps. On lunch breaks, I met with my realtor friend Sarah. She showed me a few rental options, cramped apartments with peeling linoleum houses too far from the twin school places that were either too expensive or too unsafe. But then one afternoon she slid a listing across the table. A small 3-bedroom house just 10 minutes from the hospital, still in the same school district. The rent was high for my budget, but barely within reach. The moment I saw it, something inside me said, This is it. I filled out the application with shaking hands. I listed my steady employment, my credit history, the careful savings I had built over 2 years. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not Brian, not even my children. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't bear to watch their faces light up only for the deal to fall apart. So I carried the secret like a fragile flame, guarding it until I knew it was safe to reveal. At home, I kept up appearances. I bit my tongue when my mother criticized Ava for being too loud. I clenched my fists when Lucas's achievements were brushed aside. Every slight, every insult I swallowed. Because I knew soon, very soon, we'd be free. Still, it was unbearable to see how deeply the favoritism was carving into my children. One evening, Lucas came to me clutching a sketchbook. "Mom," he whispered, "I don't think Grandma likes me anymore." His drawing showed a family of 4, me, him, Ava, and a shadowy figure off to the side. "That's Ethan," he explained. "They only see him." My heart cracked. I held him close and promised, that's going to change. Meanwhile, Ava was becoming restless. She had always been outspoken, but now her defiance carried an edge. After being scolded for playing her clarinet during Ethan's nap, she told me, "If this is what family means, I don't want it." Her voice was full of anger, but underneath, I heard the hurt. She was 10 years old, and she already believed she didn't belong in her grandparents' house. I wanted to tell them everything, that I had found us a home, that I had signed the lease, that in just a few weeks we'd walk into a place where they would never again be silenced or pushed aside. But I kept the secret. I told myself it was better to wait until the keys were in my hand. To keep their spirits alive, I created small pockets of hope. On my days off, I took them to the park, or we spread blankets on the floor of our tiny room and had movie nights with popcorn. I drew stars on our savings chart and told them every star is one step closer to freedom. They believed me even if they didn't know the full plan. Then came the call from Sarah. My application had been approved. The house would be available November 1st. I sat in my car after work, staring at the phone, tears running down my face. We had a home waiting, a real home. That evening, I tucked the twins into bed and kissed their foreheads, the secret burning in my chest. Ava squinted at me. "Mom, you look different," she said. "Less sad. Like you're planning something." I laughed softly, brushing her hair back. "Just keep being your amazing selves a little longer," I told her. "I promise it'll be worth it." And so I lived in 2 worlds. By day, I endured the suffocating atmosphere of my parents' house, watching as Brian and Melissa acted like royalty and my children shrank into shadows. By night, I dreamed of the little house with 3 bedrooms, sunlight streaming into the kitchen and laughter filling every corner. It was my secret weapon, my hidden lifeline. I had no idea then how quickly everything would unravel, forcing me to reveal the plan sooner than I intended. Because sometimes, no matter how carefully you prepare, life doesn't wait for your timeline. And when the storm came, it would push us out of that house faster than I could have imagined. The storm hit on a Tuesday in late October. I was at the hospital, running from room to room, covering more patients than usual because 2 nurses had called out sick. It was the kind of day where I barely had time to sip water, let alone check my phone. But when I finally stopped for a quick lunch break, I saw it 5 missed calls and a flood of texts from Lucas and Ava. From Lucas' mom, "Something weird is happening. Grandpa and Uncle Brian are moving our stuff." From Ava, "Grandma says we have to move to the basement. This isn't fair." Another from Lucas, "Please come home. They took all our things downstairs." And the one that broke me, "I hate it here. The basement is cold and gross, and there are spiders." My hands trembled as I read. My chest burned with rage and panic. They had actually done it. They had moved my children out of their room, out of the only safe space they had left, and shoved them into a damp, unfinished basement, without asking me, without caring what it meant for 2 10-year-old kids who had already endured enough. I begged my supervisor for coverage, explaining it was a family emergency. Thankfully, she agreed. But even then, I had to hand off my patient's finished documentation, and it was nearly an hour before I could leave. The 20-minute drive home was the longest of my life. My mind ran wild. Was Lucas's asthma triggered by the mold? Were they sitting on cold concrete? Did my parents really think this was acceptable? When I walked in the front door, I found my children huddled on the couch, eyes red and swollen. My mother sat in the kitchen with Melissa sipping tea as if nothing unusual had happened. Brian and my father were nowhere to be seen. "What's going on?" I demanded, pulling Lucas and Ava close. Ava's small arms wrapped tightly around my waist. They moved our stuff to the basement, she sobbed. They said we don't deserve the rooms upstairs. My anger was a living thing pulsing in my veins. I walked into the kitchen, voice low and steady. Why are my children's belongings in the basement? Melissa spoke first, calm and smug. We needed more space for Ethan. I have to work from home now, and we needed an office. The basement was the logical solution. The basement has mold, I shot back. It's freezing at night. It isn't safe. My mother finally looked up, meeting my eyes without an ounce of shame. The children are older. They can adapt. Besides, our other grandson deserves the best rooms. He's here all day. Yours are at school. The casual cruelty in her words nearly stole my breath. Our other grandson deserves the best rooms. She didn't even hear herself. She didn't realize she had just told me to my face that Lucas and Ava were less worthy, less loved, less important. My father walked in just then, Brian at his side. Stop being dramatic, Claire, he said. I added lights and put down some old carpet scraps. They should be grateful to have a place at all. Grateful. My voice shook with fury. Grateful that you shoved them into a basement while their cousin gets everything handed to him. Lucas has asthma. Do you even care what that damp air could do to him? Brian rolled his eyes. Kids are resilient. Melissa and I grew up with less. That was a lie. I knew full well Melissa had grown up in a 5-bedroom house in the suburbs. I looked around at the 4 of them, my parents, my brother, his wife, and saw the truth with crystal clarity. To them, this wasn't cruel. It was logical. Brian's family deserved the best. Mine deserved scraps. I returned to the living room where Lucas and Ava waited, their faces pale with fear and hope. They looked at me as though I held the power to save them. And in that moment, I realized I did. I took a deep breath, crouched to their level, and whispered 3 words that would change everything: pack your bags. They blinked at me, confused. What do you mean? Lucas asked. Exactly what it sounds like, I said, softly but firmly. Get your most important things. We'll come back for the rest later. Behind me, I heard my father scoff. Oh, for heaven's sake, Claire, stop being so dramatic. No one's asking you to leave. But he was wrong. By pushing my children into the basement, they had already made their choice. And now I was making mine. For the first time in years, I felt calm, clear, certain. We were leaving. I can still remember the stunned silence that filled the living room after I told my kids to pack their bags. For a moment, no one moved. Lucas and Ava stared at me with wide, uncertain eyes. My father looked as if I had just spoken another language. My mother's teacup froze halfway to her lips. And then all at once, the protests began. My father's voice boomed first. Claire, stop this nonsense. You're overreacting. The basement is fine. It's temporary. No, Dad, I said evenly. You've made it clear. My children don't deserve the same comfort as their cousin. That's not temporary, that's truth. Brian scoffed from behind him, shifting Ethan in his arms. You're really going to storm out over room arrangements? Grow up, Claire. I turned toward Lucas and Ava. Go on, I said gently. Pack your backpacks with your most important things. We'll come back for the rest later. Ava clutched her clarinet case like a lifeline, while Lucas grabbed his sketchbook and the stuffed dragon he'd had since he was 3. Their hands were shaking, but I saw something else too: relief. That was when my mother finally snapped out of her shock. She stormed into the living room, her voice sharp. You can't just leave because things didn't go your way. We've given you a roof for nearly 2 years. A little gratitude wouldn't hurt. Gratitude. My voice was calm, but it carried steel. I've cooked your meals, paid for groceries, covered my children's expenses without asking for a dime, and you repay us by shoving them into a basement and telling them they're less than Ethan. Gratitude doesn't cover that. Melissa, standing smugly at Brian's side, muttered, It's just a bedroom rearrangement. You're being ridiculously oversensitive. I met her gaze. Would you call it that if someone moved Ethan to a moldy basement without asking you first? Her smirk faltered, though she said nothing. My father waved his hand as though dismissing a child's tantrum. You're being unreasonable. This is family. Family makes sacrifices. Funny, I said, my voice breaking just a little. Because the sacrifices always seem to fall on my side, never Brian's. Lucas and Ava returned, then their backpacks slung over their small shoulders. Ava's jaw was set with determination. Lucas's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. We're ready, Mom, Ava said. Strong, braver than her years. That should have been the end of it, but of course it wasn't. If you walk out that door, my father said coldly, don't expect to be welcomed back with open arms. I looked at him, really looked, and realized I had stopped expecting that a long time ago. I'm not asking for open arms, Dad. I'm asking for respect. And since we'll never get that here, we're leaving. Brian stepped forward, then trying for reason but dripping with arrogance. Come on, sis, let's talk about this rationally. Don't make a scene in front of the kids. I laughed bitterly. The scene has already been made. My children have seen exactly where they stand in this family's hierarchy. There's nothing more to discuss. The air grew heavy. My parents' faces twisted with disbelief as if they couldn't fathom me actually walking away. For years they had relied on my compliance, my silence, my willingness to swallow the unfairness. They had never expected me to push back. But I had reached the line, and once crossed, there was no turning back. I guided Lucas and Ava out to the car, my mother trailing behind us, her voice rising. Claire, please, you're overreacting. Come back inside. We'll figure something out tomorrow. I turned back, meeting her eyes one last time. Tomorrow is too late. You already showed my children what we mean to you, and now I'm showing them what they mean to me. She faltered, then her anger cracking into something almost like fear. Where will you even go? She demanded. Somewhere we're valued, I said simply. I opened the car door, ushered Lucas and Ava inside, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw my family standing on the porch, their faces a mix of shock, anger, and confusion. My children looked out the window, but not with sadness, with relief. And as we drove away from the house that had once been my home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. As I pulled out of the driveway that night, my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself, and more importantly, I had chosen my children. But the weight of what we'd just done pressed down on me. Where would we go tonight? How long could we stay away? I knew my parents believed I had nowhere to turn. They thought dependence kept me tethered. What they didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment all along. The next morning, after dropping Lucas and Ava at school, I drove straight to meet Nancy. She had offered her guest room more than once, and now it was our lifeline. When I explained what had happened, she hugged me fiercely. You and the kids can stay here as long as you need, she said. That one gesture, true unconditional kindness, was more than I'd felt from my own parents in months. Later that week, I returned to the house to gather more of our belongings. My father stood at the door, his jaw clenched. So you're really leaving? He asked. Yes, I said firmly. I've signed a lease. We're moving into a house of our own on November 1st. The silence that followed was priceless. My mother blinked rapidly as if trying to process. Brian actually laughed out loud. You, a house. With what money you can't even manage without Mom and Dad's help. I met his arrogance with calm. I've been saving since the day I moved in here. Every extra shift, every penny I could tuck away. And 3 weeks ago, I signed the lease. The place is waiting for us. My father's face flushed. So you were sneaking around behind our backs? After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. I nearly laughed at the irony. Repay you? For what? For reminding me daily that my children don't matter. For pushing them into a basement while you cleared closets for Melissa. No, Dad, I don't owe you gratitude for cruelty. Melissa chimed in, arms folded. It's just a rearrangement. You're being ridiculously dramatic. I turned to her, my voice sharper than I intended. If someone shoved Ethan into a cold, moldy basement without asking you first, would you call it dramatic? She had no answer. My father tried one last time. You can't do this, Claire. You'll regret it. Think about the kids. They need family. They need love. They need safety. They need respect, I countered. If family can't give them that, then family isn't what they need. Lucas and Ava appeared, then backpacks slung over their shoulders, faces set with determination. Ava clutched her clarinet case. Lucas held his sketchbook and favorite stuffed dragon. We're ready, Mom, Ava said, her voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. I looked at my parents, at Brian and Melissa standing smugly behind them, and realized something profound. For years I had allowed their opinion of me to dictate my worth. I had worked myself to exhaustion, trying to be the dutiful daughter, the responsible sister. But none of it mattered, not to them. What mattered was the narrative they'd written long ago. Brian was the golden child, and I would always be less. But not anymore. As we carried our bags out, my father called after me, his voice dripping with contempt. Where exactly do you think you're going to go? You think your nurse's salary is enough to cover rent bills? Everything, you'll come crawling back. I stopped, turned to face him, and for the first time in my life spoke without hesitation. Dad, I make $65,000 a year. I have excellent credit, minimal debt, and nearly 2 years of savings. I am more than capable of supporting my family. You've underestimated me for too long. The shock on his face was almost comical. He had no idea what I earned, no clue how carefully I had planned. He had built his power on the assumption that I couldn't survive without him. Now that illusion crumbled. We walked out together, me, Lucas, and Ava, our heads high. As we loaded the car, I felt the chains of their control snap one by one. For the first time, I wasn't the girl desperate for approval. I was the woman who had built her own way out. As I slid into the driver's seat, Lucas asked softly, "Mom, are we really moving to our own house?" I smiled at him, tears filling my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, it's waiting for us. Just a few more days and it'll be ours." And for the first time in a long time, all three of us believed it. The morning after we carried the last of our bags out of my parents' house, I woke up at Nancy's with a strange sensation I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Lucas and Ava were still asleep on the air mattress beside me. Their breathing steady, their faces relaxed. No tension in their brows, no fear of being shushed, no dread of being told they didn't matter. For once they looked like children again. And in that quiet moment, I knew we had made the right choice. But leaving didn't end the story. It only started a new chapter. Later that week, I drove back to my parents' house with the twins to collect the rest of our belongings. My father opened the door, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "Come to apologize for your tantrum," he asked. I held his gaze. "No, we came to get our things." Behind him, my mother sat on the couch, her eyes red, a tissue crumpled in her hand. She looked smaller than I remembered, almost fragile. "Claire," she said softly, "I don't understand why you're doing this. We've given you everything." Her words nearly undid me, but I stood firm. "You gave us a place to stay, yes. And I was grateful. But gratitude doesn't erase the fact that you treated my children as if they were second class. You moved them to a basement, Mom. You told them their cousin deserved better. How do you think that made them feel?" She flinched, looking down at her hands. My father paced, muttering, "You've always twisted things. You've always been jealous of Brian." There it was again, that word jealous. As if my entire life could be reduced to envy, as if my children's pain was nothing more than my bitterness. I straightened my shoulders. This isn't about Brian. This is about Lucas and Ava. They deserve respect. They deserve safety. They deserve love that doesn't come with conditions. And if you can't give them that, then I won't allow them to stay here. Upstairs, the twins packed quietly. Lucas placed his sketchbooks into a suitcase, carefully wrapping his favorite books. Ava gathered her soccer gear and the jewelry box her father had given her last Christmas. When they came back down, my father blocked the door. "Where are you going?" "To this so-called house you've been hiding from us. You'll regret this, Claire. You can't afford it." I set the bags down, turned to face him. My voice was steady. "Dad, I earn $65,000 a year as a pediatric nurse. I have excellent credit, no debt, and nearly 2 years of savings. I am more than capable of providing for my family." For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, not arrogance, not anger, shock, maybe even doubt. He had no idea who I really was outside of the narrative he had written for me. Lucas and Ava stood behind me, silent but resolute. I opened the door, and together we carried our bags out to the car. My mother followed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Claire, please," she begged. "Don't do this. We're family." I paused, one hand on the car door. Family doesn't make you feel small. Family doesn't tell your children they don't deserve the best. Family doesn't put conditions on love. We'll see you again, but only when respect comes first. As I started the car, my father called after me, his voice cracking. "If you walk away now, don't expect us to be waiting when you want to come back." I looked at him through the rearview mirror and said quietly, "I stopped expecting that a long time ago." Lucas and Ava were silent on the drive back to Nancy's. Then Ava spoke, her voice tentative but hopeful. "Mom, will it really be our house this time, just ours?" "Yes," I said firmly. "By next week we'll be in our new home, and no one will ever tell you again that you're less than anyone else." Their shoulders relaxed. Lucas leaned his head against the window, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Ava squeezed my hand from the back seat. For the first time, they believed me. And in that moment, I believed in myself too. Because we weren't just leaving a house behind. We were leaving behind a lifetime of being told we weren't enough. We were stepping into something new, something that finally belonged to us. The day we moved into the little rental house felt like stepping into sunlight after years in a storm cellar. It wasn't grand, it wasn't fancy, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, a small yard out back, and a kitchen with windows that poured in morning light. The twins ran from room to room, their voices echoing through the empty walls, laughter bubbling up as if a weight had lifted off their shoulders. Nancy and a few co-workers came to help us unpack. What could have been a stressful day turned into a celebration. We ordered pizza-carried boxes together, and by evening the beds were set up, the kitchen was stocked, and the living room was cozy enough to collapse in with tired smiles. As I watched Lucas tape his drawings to his new bedroom wall and Ava set her clarinet on its stand in the corner, I felt tears sting my eyes. They finally had space where no one would silence them. But the relief didn't erase the noise from my parents. My phone buzzed constantly that week, angry texts from my father, guilt-laced messages from my mother. After everything we've done, you walk out one read. The children need their grandparents, another said. I responded only once. We are safe. We are settled. We will reach out when we are ready. That was all they needed to know. The following Monday, as I dropped Lucas and Ava off at school, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, I looked like myself. No hollow eyes from swallowed resentment, no forced smile. Just me. Stronger, steadier, freer. Of course, freedom came with its own challenges. Rent stretched my budget thin, and every grocery trip required careful planning. But even on the hardest days, I reminded myself these struggles are ours. They come without shame, without criticism, without someone telling my children they should be grateful for scraps. That made every sacrifice worth it. 2 weeks later, my parents showed up unannounced at the new house. I had just returned from work, still in scrubs, when I opened the door to find them on my porch. My father's expression was stern, my mother's pleading. Amanda, he said immediately, this has gone on long enough. Come home. This is our home now, I said firmly, stepping aside only enough to let them in. They walked through, slowly taking in the modest rooms. My mother's lips pressed tight. It's smaller than I expected, she said. It's perfect for us, I replied. My father wasted no time. The children need their family, their grandparents, their uncle and cousin. What they need is to be treated with respect, I countered. When you can provide that, you're welcome in their lives. For nearly an hour, they cycled through tactics, guilt, anger, even appeals to family unity. Finally, my father muttered, maybe we were insensitive. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was the first crack in their armor. I took it as a start. In the weeks that followed, news of our departure rippled through the extended family. Most weren't surprised. Many had seen the favoritism firsthand. Aunt Susan came by with cookies sitting at our table as if nothing had changed. You did the right thing, she told me. Your children look lighter already. And they did. Lucas's teachers emailed to say he was participating again, his creativity shining in class. Ava practiced her clarinet daily, her confidence returning with each note. The house, though small, echoed with laughter and music. Meanwhile, I heard through family whispers that Brian and Melissa were struggling. Without me to cook meals, manage chores, or help with Ethan, they floundered. My mother, exhausted from babysitting, admitted to Susan that she hadn't realized how much I'd carried. That realization, though late, gave me a strange sense of justice. One evening, as I tucked Ava into bed, she said softly, I like our house, Mom. I feel like I can breathe here. Her words undid me. Out of all the validation, all the proof that we had made the right choice, nothing meant more than that. Because in this house, my children weren't guests. They weren't burdens. They weren't invisible. They belonged. And so did I. 6 months passed faster than I could have imagined. Our little rental, once bare walls and scattered boxes, had transformed into a home bursting with life. Lucas's drawings filled the refrigerator again, this time without fear of being replaced. Ava's clarinet practice echoed through the rooms, no longer silenced by complaints about nap schedules. The house held our chaos, our noise, our love, and no one could take that from us. I had settled into my promotion at the hospital as charge nurse. The schedule was steadier, the pay higher, and though the responsibility was heavy, it felt good to finally be recognized for the work I had always given. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. The twins felt it too. Their laughter returned. Their confidence bloomed. Lucas joined an after-school art program. Ava made the advanced band and talked excitedly about trying out for soccer. Their spirits, once crushed under constant criticism, were alive again. My parents remained in the picture, though cautiously. Sunday dinners had become a once-a-month ritual. Boundaries were clear. If my children weren't respected, we would leave. And though my father struggled to hide his old habits, even he seemed to be learning restraint. My mother, surprisingly, was the one who began to soften. One afternoon while visiting, she admitted quietly, "After you left, nothing was the same. I realized how much we had taken you for granted. It wasn't the apology I had once longed for, but it was enough." Brian and Melissa, however, weren't faring so well. Their renovation dragged on. Without me to shoulder chores, and childcare cracks began to show. I heard through Susan that they had started couples counseling. Melissa had returned to work full-time, and childcare had become a daily struggle. For years, they had basked in the glow of being the golden ones. Now stripped of that pedestal, they were finally facing the reality of their own choices. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but only a flicker. Then in April, something unexpected happened. A small 3-bedroom house went up for sale in our neighborhood. The price was just within my reach thanks to careful saving and my promotion. The thought of owning a home, a permanent place where no one could uproot my children, lit a fire inside me. The process was terrifying. Mortgage applications, inspections, budgeting it felt like stepping onto unsteady ground. But I pushed forward, driven by the vision of Lucas and Ava running in their own backyard of bedrooms no one could ever take away. When my offer was accepted, I cried in the realtor's office. Telling the twins was one of the sweetest moments of my life. "We're buying a house," I announced, handing them the photo of the little place with a white front door. Lucas's eyes went wide. "Our house, for real?" Ava squealed, already planning how to paint her room. "Can we get a dog?" she asked, hopefully. I laughed. "We'll see." Even my father surprisingly extended a hand. He looked over the inspection report with me, pointing out practical things I might miss. One evening, as he stood to leave, he said almost gruffly, "I'm proud of you, Claire. Buying a house on your own isn't small." It wasn't a perfect apology for the past, but it was more than I'd ever thought I'd hear from him. The day we closed on the house, I stood alone in the empty living room, keys in hand. Sunlight streamed across the bare floors, and the weight of everything we had endured crashed into me. Just 2 years earlier, I had been a newly divorced mother, dependent on my parents, crushed by their favoritism and disdain. Now I was a homeowner, advancing in my career, raising 2 resilient children who knew their worth. I sank onto the floor, tears spilling freely. Not from sadness, but from relief, from pride, from the unshakable certainty that we had come through the fire stronger than before. Sometimes the greatest betrayals don't end your story. They rewrite it, and ours was just beginning. Moving day was brighter than I ever dared hope. The little house with the white front door stood waiting, sunlight catching the windows, as if it too was ready for us. Friends from work arrived early, carrying boxes, laughing, making what could have been an exhausting day feel like a celebration. Even my parents came, though quietly this time, without their usual criticisms. For once, they simply helped my father, tightening bolts on the beds, my mother unpacking dishes in the kitchen. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. By evening, the house had transformed. Beds were made, the kitchen was stocked. The living room held mismatched couches, but also the sound of my children's laughter. Lucas darted from room to room, already taping his drawings to the walls. Ava opened her window wide, letting the spring air in her clarinet case propped proudly in the corner. The house felt alive, filled with us, not overshadowed by anyone else. When the last of the helpers left, only my parents remained. We sat together on the back porch, watching Lucas and Ava chase each other in the small yard. My mother's voice broke the silence. "This is a good home, Claire. You've done well." For the first time, I didn't shrink from her words or question them. I simply nodded. "Thank you." My father added quietly, "I know we haven't always been fair, but seeing you here, it makes me proud." The admission startled me, but I accepted it. Maybe it wasn't the full apology I once longed for, but it was a step. That night, after tucking the twins into their very own rooms no one could ever take from them, I stood in the hallway listening to the peace in their breathing. My chest tightened with gratitude. We had fought so hard to reach this place, to break free from a house that smothered us, to carve out a space where we mattered. And now here we were. I thought about everything it had taken, the insults disguised as jokes, the constant comparisons, the dismissal of my children's worth. I thought about the day their things were shoved into a basement, as if they didn't deserve more. That wound had cut the deepest, but it had also been the catalyst. Because sometimes the most painful betrayals are the ones that finally push you toward freedom. The lesson was clear. Family isn't defined by blood or obligation. It's defined by respect, by kindness, by the choice to value each other. My parents had failed that test for years. Brian and Melissa had never understood it at all. But in leaving, I had shown Lucas and Ava what it meant to stand up for yourself, to demand dignity, to walk away, when staying meant losing yourself. 6 months later, our home blossomed. The walls were filled with Lucas's artwork. Ava's music drifted through the air, and the backyard sprouted a little garden we planted together. Their confidence grew daily. Lucas joined an art program. Ava earned a spot in the advanced band. Their laughter, once stifled, now filled every corner of the house. And me, I had grown too. I was no longer the daughter begging for scraps of approval. I was a mother who had built stability from ashes, who had chosen her children over tradition, who had proven, if only to herself, that she was enough. As the sun set on that first day in our new home, I sat on the porch watching my children chase fireflies. The air was cool, the sky streaked with gold and violet. Peace wrapped around me like a blanket. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pack your bags and walk away. Not because it's easy, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you finally understand you and your children deserve more. And when you choose that path, you don't just leave something behind. You begin. That night, after the last box had been unpacked, and the laughter of moving day faded into the quiet hum of our new home, I sat alone in the living room. The kids were asleep, each in their own room, their breaths steady, safe, and unburdened. For the first time in years, I let myself breathe, too. The silence was different here. It wasn't heavy, filled with unspoken judgment or simmering tension. It was soft, like a promise. The walls, though still bare in places, seemed to hold us gently, whispering, "You belong here." I thought about the road that had brought us to this moment, the divorce, the exhaustion, the nights I stayed awake, calculating every dollar, the sting of favoritism that cut deeper than words. And I thought about the choice that had changed everything the night I told my children to pack their bags. That night, I didn't just leave a house. I left behind years of being silenced, of being told my worth depended on others. Here in this little home, we were free. Free to laugh loudly, free to celebrate small victories, free to be exactly who we were without fear of being diminished. Lucas could pin his drawings on the fridge without them being replaced. Ava could play her clarinet without being shushed. And I could finally stand tall as the mother they needed, one who chose courage over compliance. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I knew life would still hold struggles. Bills would come. Work would exhaust me. But in this house, those struggles would be hours carried together without shame. Sometimes the hardest endings carry the seeds of the most beautiful beginnings. And for us, this was just the start.